I would like to thank Yakovos Michailidis, who he said that I was enthusiastic to accept his proposal to start looking for a publisher for this book. No, this was not an enthusiasm. I was frankly startled by the audacity of his proposal, because for years this book has been out of print in Bulgaria, and I got all kinds of proposals to republish it, and I always refused, because I clearly felt that I do not have the time, the drive to make the necessary re-editing of this huge book. It was written when I was much younger and much more enthusiastic, and this is a book which the publisher has to be audacious to publish it, because this is not a book that would make him rich. It did not make me rich. But the book was a kind of a side affair. When I started it, I never thought. I was thinking of an article. Never thought that this article will grow to a huge monster. In fact, because the first article that I published on this topic was, I think, in 1982, as far as I remember. It was called The Propaganda of the Balkan States During the Balkan Wars. And I gave the article to a quite influential journal at the time in Bulgaria. The journal gave it for reviewing, it turned out, to the most prominent Bulgarian historian at the time. Not most prominent as a historian, but most prominent from political point of view. He was a member of the Central Committee of the Bulgarian Communist Party, and he didn't like the title at all. I was wondering why. I was too naive at the time. And finally, I called him on the phone and asked him, professor, he was a member of the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences at the time, Christov. I asked him why he did not give his agreement to the publishing of the article. And he said, young man, you have written a nice article, but unfortunately, even in the title of the article you're wrong. I said, what do you mean? He said, Bulgaria never did any propaganda. The propaganda was done by its neighbors. The Bulgarians only defended themselves. And you should not use this ugly word propaganda in the title. I tried this and that, nothing helped. And finally I said, Professor Christov, if the word propaganda is so ugly and bestial, why do we have in the Central Committee of our party a department which is called Political Propaganda and Agitation? And he immediately ended the conversation, but the article was published. So this was the beginning. It was not an active opposition, but things change, even in Bulgaria. Even immediately after 1989, I published an article which was called, it's closely connected with that, it was called The Myth of San Stefano, Bulgaria, as a Sacred Cow of Bulgarian Nationalism. Then you could see a reaction at the time, including with whole pages of newspapers, whole pages of newspaper articles attacking me for my dreams, anti-Bulgarian dreams. But the basic, I would say that the basic conclusions of the article now are in the textbooks of Bulgaria. So they are accepted by Bulgarian teachers. It takes time and effort, unfortunately. What else should I say about this book? I have an unpleasant habit of mine. I become bored with subjects. that I deal with. When I'm being asked what's my professional field, I usually answer that I'm a professional trespasser. I work in the fields of other historians, and you know that there is a kind of a feeling of feudal possession of a certain topic. And historians don't like trespassers who work in their allotted fields, but this is how I work. So for many years I have not worked in the field of propaganda. I moved to other things, to working history of advertising. Then generally, because I'm a product of the socialist education in Bulgaria, of course, I was taught that the role of the people, of the nation, of the oppressed people, is a driving force in history, and maybe as a result, a natural result of this propaganda directed at me, I started to pay more and more attention to the role, first, of limited groups in history, and finally came to the natural result, natural conclusion. I became interested in the role of individuals in history, but not individuals like Winston Churchill, this was a passing fad of mine, but individuals like common peasants who had nothing more than an elementary education. And I became interested what change they made in the life of the nation, a single person. And maybe one of the results of my work on the history of propaganda was quite useful to me personally. I became very suspicious to all kinds of myths, legends, preconceived ideas of which the Balkans are so wealthy. And maybe just to end it, I will end it with a nice memory that I have in the middle of 1990s. I was in the States. I was then Woodrow Wilson guest professor in Washington, and I was invited to read a course of lectures on Balkan ethnic history at the American Military Academy in Washington. This was in the midst of the Yugoslav War. And the class was made of something like 30 American colonels, men and women, who were aspiring to become generals. And I was told that out of 30, only 3 would become brigadier generals, so they were very jealous of each other. So I went to the military academy. The class jumped to attention, and let me say that I had the misfortune to spend 2 years and 3 months in the Bulgarian army, and the net result was that I became an ardent pacifist because of that. So the experience was quite new to me. So I told them, the subject of my lectures, and immediately one of the colonels jumped and said, "Professor, could I ask you a question?" And I said, "Of course, shoot, shoot." And he asked, "Professor, you're going to tell us, you're supposed to tell us about the ethnic history of the Balkans. Are you yourself a pure Bulgarian?" Pure. Pure. And I told him, "Colonel, if we were living in the 17th century and you have asked me this question, I would have thrown my gauntlet in your face and asked you to a duel, because your questions implies that all my grandmothers have been so ugly as not to attract the tens of thousands of invaders who pass through the Balkans." And let's stop on this optimistic note.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ilchev. We have some time for some questions to our guests or to Professor Ilchev, so I am opening the floor for further discussion.
What about a topic for a future book, propaganda of others against the Balkans? Because the Balkans has been a favorite place for propaganda by third parties. So, do you think that it would be interesting? I'm not a historian, of course, myself, but with this excellent panel here, would you think that this could be an issue for a future work?
I entirely agree with the list of that Professor Stefanidis made of the things that he would have liked to read in this book and he didn't find. My only excuse for that is there used to be a Russian collective writer in the 19th century, a group of writers who wrote under the same pseudonym. And they wrote mainly aphorisms. And one of the aphorisms was, spit in the eye of the guy who tells you that you can embrace the unembraceable. So that to your question, yes, of course, I hope that someone will try to embrace the unembraceable and write such a book.
Thank you.
Professor Ilchev, I'm not sure at the moment yesterday with нас днес на въпрос аналитически. The reaction of Professor Christoph was the only negative reaction among your academic colleagues. It was the 1995 and they were not all ready to accept new proposals such as yours.
Well, I do not look like a hero, not at all. Very far from that. No, I would say that most of my colleagues were astounded by the dimensions of the research, mostly. Not so much by the content of it. In fact, this was my second doctoral dissertation. We have a complex system in Bulgaria with 2 doctoral dissertations. This was the second doctoral dissertation. It was twice as big as that, because the first volume was social psychology. It was theory, how, from the point of view of social psychology, manipulation is being made. But for the sake of the readers, I cut it when I published it. But no, there was no political, no historian's negative. There was a surprise that such a thing can be written and should be written, but not a negative surprise. No.
Somebody else?
Yes, I would like to ask you something related to your last remark, that you are more interested now in the history of individuals. I would like to ask you how these individuals reacted to this propaganda, because propaganda, like nationalism, creates homogeneity and compact entities. So, from your experience with the subject, how did individuals react to this propaganda in a period that we had percentages of literacy and the education system was in formation?
Let me give you an example with myself. Because me, or like all of you, are targets of propaganda. And even the most intelligent of us, unfortunately, change imperceptibly under the impact of propaganda. So, what's the example? I think when I was a student, 4th-year student, for the first time in my life, I had the opportunity to go abroad to England, to Great Britain, for 2 weeks. At that time, the pride of Bulgarian industry was a small electronic calculator. We call it Elka. Our propaganda was telling us this is the most, probably, the most modern, up-to-date thing created in the world. In something unimaginable. And so I went to London. I went to Kensington Road, where there are hundreds of stores, usually owned by Indians or Arabs, of electronic equipment. And I saw in one of these stores hundreds of different small personal electronic calculators. And I thought to myself, Ivan, they swindled you. And you think you're intelligent, you're not.
Just one comment to the previous question. I think that still there is a long distance to cover for the Balkan propaganda itself. As Professor Gounaris also already mentioned, Professor Ilchev's book, based mostly on Bulgarian archives, on pamphlets, newspapers, most of them English newspapers. So I think there is a demand to open the archives, all the archives, to everyone. So maybe in the future we should have a joint publication based on Greek, Romanian, Turkish archives, and to see what the reactions were and what the paths of propaganda, of course, were. Just this.
Eventually, thanks to Ilchev and to a whole new generation of Bulgarian historians, it looks that we have alternative views of Bulgarian history, and Bulgarians were historians. Bulgarian historians were courageous enough to start this reapproachment or deconstruction of Bulgarian history, and been much more courageous than Greeks in this venture. And I was wondering, you think that this courage is due to the fact that, in a way, Bulgarians have been betrayed, in a sense, by history more than once, so they're more apt to do so, rather than Greeks, because we still hang on history and we treasure it, and we think that it is kind of backbone of our nation states, and very precious to harm it by revealing receipts, paid checks, and so on.
Well, first of all, I want to thank Basil for the appreciation of Bulgarian historians, high appreciation. I'm not really sure that this is the true. Maybe he sees it from Greece this way, but let me again give you an example. It's very difficult to write alternative history or even to think of alternative history. In 2005, we had a massive celebration of the union of Eastern Romania with Bulgaria, 120 years. You know that historians thrive on jubilees. This is the time when they usually get grants, donations from the government, money, things like that. So we like them. We never miss them. And in our faculty, we had a long tradition. Every year we have an annual conference of the faculty. And the topic of the conference is decided by everyone the year before. So I suggested, in 2004, I suggested the topic to be alternative history. Alternative history. And during all this year, for a number of reasons, I don't know why, I did not discuss with my colleagues what they're supposed to do, what they intend to do, and so on. And I personally decided to write not an article, or a paper for the conference, but I designed a Jubilee newspaper, a whole newspaper. You know that from time to time such newspapers are being published on Jubilee. So Jubilee newspapers devoted to the 120th anniversary of the failure of the attempt to join by force Eastern Romania to Bulgaria, and 120th anniversary of the existence of independent Romania. And when I went to the conference, it turned out that I'm the only one who has written alternative history. The others had papers on the alternative in history, which is, of course, a completely different thing. So that this is not a massive event. It's not a massive event. It happens. It happens. It happens. It happens, and I think it happens mostly with the young people. Most of them have been my students.
Perhaps it happens with conferences outside Bulgaria.
Yes. But young people who have started to treat history not as something that's sacred, but people who take pleasure in reading history, researching history. I've always said that I have been privileged all my life until I became rector of Sofia University, because I have been privileged to earn my bread and butter by indulging in my hobby and getting my salary from the innocent taxpayers who do not know that I'm not toiling in the field of history, but I'm enjoying myself. I'm playing with history. That's it.
Thank you so much. I was wondering, you have a passage in your book where you try to evaluate how let's say, successful propaganda is. In a way, all of us being here is a testimony that we care about it, but the question is, does it work? And it seems that, you know, you have indicated it does work in some liminal ways, but in your book you actually say we cannot really evaluate that impact. So some examples maybe on that would be, thank you.
Well, I was very careful when I was writing this, because yes, even today I continue to think that it is very difficult to find a concrete example of a case where the propaganda had reached its ultimate goal. Or it's very difficult to differentiate propaganda from hundreds of other means of molding the attitude of people, of all of us. Propaganda is only one of these channels of manipulation. There are a number of other channels. It's impossible for me to measure it. It has been mentioned several times by Professor Gunaris, by all the other speakers, that the book is based mostly on Bulgarian sources, and this is true. This is true. This is why I have been very careful not to. I have been very careful to criticize enough Bulgarian propaganda. But at the time when I was writing it was virtually impossible to get into the archives of a neighboring Balkan state. Almost impossible. We had in Bulgaria a very useful organization called SIBAL. It was an organization of archivists which had as an ultimate goal to make Bulgaria kind of a center of copies of documents from all Balkan archives. It was funded by UNESCO. And I still remember the 10th year anniversary of Sibau, when Professor Nikolai Todorov, the father of Maria Todorova, the famous historian, young father of Sibau, he wrote a glowing report of the successes of Sibau. He said, everything is excellent. We are doing excellent work with collecting archives from different Balkan countries. We have some problems with Romanians. They do not open their archives. The Serbians decline every participation in the projects. The Greeks do not talk to us. The Turks are not, still do not know what they have in their archives. And the Albanians, of course, the Albanians do not talk to anyone.
Let me add just one remark from another point of view. If we will consider what propagandists were trying to do as a project, it's obvious that this project was totally unsuccessful, because they wanted to convince Western countries in order to get as much as possible. So, mission was not accomplished, to use this military terminology.
It was a mission impossible.
It was mission impossible. But to continue with this military terminology, this project had collateral damages, which have created to the people and to political personnel of Western countries an image of the region like being the anthropological museum of Europe, as a scholar has written. So probably this collateral damage was more serious than the initial purpose.
Or unintended consequences.
Hello? I would like to touch on something that was briefly mentioned by Professor Stefanidis, but I would like to state it more bluntly. My impression of Bulgarian propaganda is that they were the greatest victims themselves, because they were usually stating things like the San Stefano Treaty in moral terms, instead of looking at it as an opportunity of furthering their cause by manipulating. So they were so rigid in their understanding that they were not able to really act in a dialogue with the countries they tried to target, and consequently they painted themselves into a corner. The very emotional problems with dealing with these themes is something also that you see in many countries, many places. And I would say that if we look at the Greek policy in Macedonia after 1990, we see that although you have critical voices in Greece on this issue, it has been very difficult to have a sober discussion of it. And for that reason, it has probably done a lot of damage to Greece as well, since they have not been able to approach it in a more, what can I say, well, more sober and more practical way.
If we could speak about some kind of success of propaganda, in order to have a success of propaganda, you need money, lots of money, uncontrolled by the public. You need a sustained effort for decades. And you need a presupposition at the target audience that you, at least to a certain extent, belong to it. If you are completely different, it's virtually impossible, practically impossible.